In this guide, we have 5 lessons directly from a challenger player who we sent to Gold ELO to find out what on earth is going on in this ELO bracket that makes it so toxic and difficult to climb out of. By the end of this guide, you will have learned 5 new ways to play that you haven't heard of before and will have a huge impact on how you approach your climb moving forward. So let's get straight into it. The very first tip we want to cover is to stop overthinking objectives or win conditions in your own games. It can be easy to believe that you get outscaled based off of your team composition, or your opponents will use Baron, Rift Herald, or Dragon to cleanly close out a game. This is especially true if you're always watching competitive play or challenger streams where people are constantly harping on about these things, because they're pretty relevant. However, in your own solo queue experience, it is very doubtful that people know how to properly use objectives. So stop freaking out whenever your opponents get one. For example, here we have our challenger expert Hector in a losing game in low elo. As you can see on the minimap, his team is already down 2 inhibitors, which will be tough to deal with. On top of those dire circumstances, his team has also opted into trying to take a single Ocean Dragon and conceding over the Baron for free.
This trade is not good in high elo. It's nice that we're delaying Dragon Soul and whatnot, right? But we have 2 inhibs down. There's no way they don't get like towers here.
Notice what he said there. In high elo, the reason why this is an awful trade is simple. If their opponents are smart, they'll send 1 to 2 players to pressure the super minions by empowering them with Baron. This would easily suffocate Hector's team into a nearly guaranteed win. However, take a look at what actually ends up happening. As most of the enemy team sets up to siege top lane, the Talon, who should just be buffing up waves, goes for a ridiculous engage and ends up dying for free. With that massive blunder, Hector and his team are able to just barely fend off this Baron push and manage to stall the game out just a bit longer. Now, that could just be a one-off example, right? That was just a silly little limit test by the enemy Talon. It won't happen every time. Well, let's watch in the second go-around where the exact same situation happens yet again. All Hector can do is follow his team, who are once again conceding Baron for a single Dragon, despite being down 2 inhibitors. Surely, the enemy team has learned their lesson and will close out the game, right? It's impossible to defend such a bad situation. Oh wait, instead of giving his team time to push buffed up waves, the enemy Alistar immediately engages a 5v5 fight. This is literally the worst possible play he could have made. A fair fight is the only way Hector and his team had a chance of stopping this push. As you can see with Alistar's massive blunder, Hector's team barely scrapes by and manages to survive this deadly Baron push. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, Hector didn't freak out at his teammates' decisions, and just followed along, even though he knew it was wrong. Technically, despite being behind, he and his team should have contested both Barons. Yes, it's unlikely they win the fight, but they're going to lose the game anyway. This would be their highest chance of making a comeback. The problem is, neither side really understands macro all that much. In the same way that his own teammates don't understand why they should contest Baron, the enemy team doesn't know how to use it effectively. So, don't tunnel vision too much on what your opponent might do with an objective, and don't start getting angry or flaming your teammates. And especially don't overly tilt and try to contest the objective or something on your own. It's much better to just follow along with what your team is doing, since things are likely not going to be nearly as bad as you might think. Just play patiently and hold some comfort that things are probably not nearly as bad as you think they are. If you keep your cool and keep playing with your team, then the possibilities of a comeback are much more likely. And speaking of understanding objective values, here's tip number 2, with another super important concept that needs to be learned. In a different game where Hector is playing Annie and pushing bottom, he and his team dive the enemy Twisted Fate. At the same time, Hector notices that his top lane is getting hard shoved by the enemy's Rift Herald. Let's see what he has to say.
We should let this Rift Herald take our tower, by the way. We should let them take inhib. Okay, so you know like what the opposite is? Like, don't take an inhibitor early? What if my teammates just didn't defend this? They would just take an early inhib and we'd just be hard winning, no?
If you've never heard of this before, let's explain. Taking inhibitors before around 25 minutes is generally not good for you. Baron is still too hard to take at that time, and Dragon Soul is likely not a threat yet. What this means is that the pressure that the inhibitor provides is negligible, and you're just funneling a ton of farm into your opponents this way. Usually, taking too early of an inhibitor is going to throw your lead by how much farm you're losing because your wave is always pushing away from you. Not only that, but your opponents get even more free CS to take. It's pretty bad. By the way, if that sounds wrong to you, then let's put it this way. Think about the League community as a whole. No one can agree on what's overpowered, how to play the game, which role has the most impact, what champions to ban, etc. But this concept you just learned is almost universally agreed upon by most of the high elo player base. That's a pretty good sign. You probably shouldn't take early inhibitors. That's not the point we want to make here though. A lot of you who watch our guides already know that. But what's frustrating is that players will defend their inhibitors no matter what. Just look at the Hecarim and Yuumi. They're about to take a bad fight to stop their opponents from making a mistake that would make the game infinitely easier for Hector and his team. When we put it this way, doesn't it seem really silly for them to fight here?
Wait, I want to bait this guy into taking inhib. Go ahead. Go take it. Good. Do it. You got it. Let him. It's bad. No!
Tragically, the plan doesn't work, but at least they end up getting a kill.
People know that it's bad to take an early inhib, but they won't let their opponents take an early inhib. Like, hello?
The main takeaway here isn't so much about the inhibitor, but the mindset of a lot of players in this game. Many correct strategies don't feel good to do. For example, freezing waves is pretty boring. Not fighting your opponents and instead only playing around minion waves is pretty lame, which is why you see throws like the one we just saw before. But if you want to improve, you need to learn to be objective about what you're doing. Letting your own inhibitor die is one of those types of strategies, and good players will let that happen whenever there's a possibility for it. Like we said though, this isn't just about inhibitors, this can apply to a wide variety of situations. For example, take a look here.
Also, she should just let this tower die. She just left me 250 gold. Thank you.
Just remember this important lesson. If something feels bad to do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Letting inhibitors or even towers go down can often be the correct call, as you can see here. Saving her tower definitely didn't work in Lissandra's favor this game. And as a side note, one thing that certainly doesn't feel bad to do is join our community over at Skillcapped. Why? Because our memberships are risk-free, and you learn way more tips like this, which enable you to hard carry yourself out of low elo with dozens of challenger courses tailored to the ranks you're actually playing in. You simply can't find this anywhere else. And if you don't significantly climb while actively using Skillcapped, you can claim a full refund. This is a win-win deal for you, so check us out after this if you're serious about improving. But for now, let's move on to our third tip, and to set things off, we've got Hector playing Twisted Fate and killing this Aurelia in bot lane with the help of his Lulu. As things progress, we get a lot of information on the map. Cassio is in mid lane, and the other 3 members of the enemy team are in top lane. So, what should Hector do as a response here? If you're an avid watcher of our macro content, then that may have been a misleading question for you, because we're sure many of you would say to take this tower for free, which Hector definitely can, but he just starts recalling instead. There are 2 important concepts to keep in mind here. 1, taking towers with others around is way less valuable. If you're on your own, an inner turret gives 600 gold total. That is a massive chunk of gold. But in this case, Hector had a Lulu around. That means he'd get just a little over 300 gold. That wouldn't change what he could buy when he recalled. He'd still just get a Lichbane, and at most he'd get an extra Amp Tome. Which brings us to our second concept.
I could have maybe got this tower down here. I did think about it, but it's just such a loss of tempo. I have ultimate and Lichbane. Like, I could just get a kill on the map right now.
Like I said, being out on the map faster was a big deal, since he wouldn't have gotten this Hecarim kill otherwise. And don't take this the wrong way, this isn't a Twisted Fate specific concept. Here's a simple way of looking at it. Solo queue is just a random mess of fights all the time, right? You never know what your teammates are going to get up to. Well, being out on the map faster with your item spike is a great way of controlling that chaos. The more fights you're at with your items, the more likely your own team wins and the enemy team loses. And if that happens, well, you just end up taking objectives anyways. The saying goes, objectives win games, not kills. But the reality of the situation is that in low elo, kills can often decide the outcome of the game way more reliably. So following this tip and never wasting tempo is a great way of carrying more games. Alright, now Hector did not want us to show you this, but let's see just how important this mentality is with that previous Annie game.
It's not like me getting that tower does anything. Like, okay, let's say I get 300 gold for it. I get like, I can't even get an Amp Tome. I guess I would have to get the next wave, but like getting an Amp Tome doesn't really change how strong I am right now. I would rather just base, be on the map with Leandries, and be really strong, right?
As you can see, this is a mindset he's constantly preaching, and thanks to his decision to base earlier, Hector was out on the map faster with his Leandries power spike. And thanks to that, he was fully prepared for this dragon fight. He has his passive and flash ready. This is surely going to, yeah. Well, it wouldn't be a guide featuring Hector if we didn't have to stomach some kind of eye-burning play. That being said, the concept still proved useful here. The fact that he planned his base as quickly as possible made sure he had Leandries for this fight. And despite just how terrible his play was, he still walked out of that with 2 kills. Now, moving on to the fourth tip, we want to address something that gets regurgitated a lot in League. The insult, KDA player, gets thrown around so loosely these days that people often take it the wrong way, making their own climb so much harder. Guys, believe it or not dying in the game is actually good. We know, what a shock. Now, if you take it too far, your own play is going to be a lot worse off for it. Earlier, during this Twisted Fate game, Hector was simulating what it may be like for a player who takes that mentality incorrectly. Look at how he's positioning in this team fight, not having any regard for his own life, and just ended up dying for no reason.
Okay, but honestly, that's just a dumb mentality. One, I couldn't even play that fight seriously. Like, I couldn't even position correctly. I was just like, I can't even imagine people who play like that. It's just so weird to me. I wasn't positioning in that fight very well. But at the very least, now we can watch me in a fight where I actually value my own life because I know I'm a fed player and I know I'm going to carry this game.
The players you're playing with don't know what that insult actually means. Just because you have few to zero deaths doesn't mean you're a KDA player. It's good not to die. Playing for KDA means that you're not willing to trade your own life or take a risk when it actually is valuable to do so. For example, if your Malphite ults the 10-0 Vayne, you should probably try to follow up on that to shut her down, even at the cost of your own life. That would be fine. What it doesn't mean is playing hyper aggressive and not caring if you die. That's just dumb and results in lost fights like the one we saw here. Take a look at the difference between the previous fight and this one. It's not like Hector is going to play a billion yards away. He goes for a flank teleport on the enemy team, but notice his positioning afterwards. He's a lot more careful, especially since there's a lot of threats around. It's completely different to the approach he had before, and the results are pretty visible.
You can see him positioning on the outskirts, and anytime someone goes in, I just have complete control over them. Like, I'm just using my opponent's terrible positioning against them. Like, your opponents are gonna misposition. You don't have to misposition to, like, force something, you know? Like, they're gonna troll into you anyway. So why do you need to play, like, super aggressive and not as a KDA player? Just stand back and let them into you, and you'll win every single fight in low elo. Even in high elo, to be honest.
Remember that the key to climbing is being better than everyone in your games. That means that your own life should hold a lot of value, and you shouldn't be so quick to give it away. Stop letting dumb things that people say get to you and just play correctly instead of getting in your own head about whether you're dying too much or too little. And with that, we go on to our final tip, which is a simple but very useful one. When playing, you should constantly be tracking where everyone on the map is and where they could be based on where you last saw them. Let's hop into this final review to show you just how impactful this can be for carrying. Playing Victor, Hector rotated towards bottom to help a fight. Before getting there though, his Amumu managed to clean up the enemy Tristana solo. So, by the time Hector gets there, he has to kill the Nautilus on his own, which takes him a little while. This brings us to a very similar situation that we discussed previously. Hector is hitting a tower here, despite being able to base for a Void Staff and not wasting tempo on irrelevant gold. Here's the thing though, he sees a much more important play in sight. Let's take a listen in.
Their death timers are disjointed, so I can probably just walk up and prevent Tristana from ever getting back to lane for like 15 seconds.
This is why simple tracking can be so impactful for carrying games. We just saw Mordekaiser and Wukong top and Lissandra mid. Tristana is on her way down here, but Nautilus is yet to be seen, despite being alive. But obviously, he can't possibly be down here yet since he just respawned. Just because you haven't seen someone doesn't mean you can't know where they obviously are. Depending on where you last saw them, they have to walk all the way to their destination. This is the same concept as seeing someone top and knowing that they can't be bot side for 30 to 40 seconds at a minimum. This is why he stayed and disregarded the previous tip we talked about. He was already strong enough to where he could punish hard if Tristana was on her own, and he easily predicted that this would be the case. Now, even Nautilus shows up, Tristana is too low to do anything, so Hector could just flash in and score a very easy kill thanks to his previous tracking. We could cut the clip here and make it seem like he's the super aware macro genius, but no. He actually fails his own lesson and forgets to keep tracking Lissandra and overstayed his welcome, giving over a massive shutdown.
I'm trolling. Wait a minute, I thought I saw Lissandra top lane. Am I blind? Also, she should just let this tower die. She just left me 250 gold. Thank you.
And now you have the full picture as to why he was dead in that previous example. Lovely. But yeah, just remember, be much more mindful of tracking in your games. You saw the insane value he got by just remembering that Nautilus was spawning a bit later than Tristana. This was a game-winning play from such a simple concept. But at the same time, forget to track your opponents and you'll just hand over free kills. It's a big way to instantly improve at the game, and it takes very little effort. Anyways guys, that's a wrap on this guide. Hopefully you can see that super simple to implement tips can have a big impact on your gameplay. Apply these 5 concepts and you'll be doing much better in no time. We here at SkillCapped want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.